Very good. So I formally released this publication, and I'd like to congratulate the Bharathi Puskalayam for making this effort. Comrade K. Balakrishnan, State Secretary of the CPIM, a Central Committee member, is here. Comrade Gunashekaran, who began this meeting, is here. Mr. Comrade Nagarajan, Comrade P.K. Rajan, and all the others who are assembled here. I'm very honored today for two reasons for releasing this publication. One, of course, is that Frederick Engels is one of the co-founders of what we call the Marxist World Outlook. I'll come to him, but this occasion, today being the 113th birthday of Bhagat Singh, and Bhagat Singh's entire contribution to India's freedom struggle, freedom movement, and radicalizing Indian youth has been phenomenal. In a short span of 23 years, it is amazing. Every time you read anything Bhagat Singh has written, you are actually awestruck at the entire range of his knowledge. In this short span of 23 years, must have been about 15, 16 years of reading and writing. And in that, he's produced such phenomenal work that it is something that is amazing. And in this, he was a completely dedicated Marxist who argued before the court when the court asked him and his revolutionary associate Batukeshwar Dutt after the Delhi bomb case. When the court asked him, what is the slogan that you keep shouting every day of Inqilab Zindabad? Bhagat Singh explains in a written note that long live revolution, what does it mean? What does revolution mean? And he ends that by saying where exploitation of man by man does not exist, exploitation of nation by nation will not exist, and it will be a society that will be under the leadership of the dictatorship of the proletariat. For somebody in 1928, 29, 30s to talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat about a decade after the Russian Revolution and talk it in a British court required tremendous amount of courage, tremendous amount of conviction and dedication. And on his birthday, you have chosen to release this book and utilize the coming 2 months till the 28th of November, which is Frederick Engels' 200th birthday, or he'd complete 200 years. And that, on that occasion, these 2 months will be utilized to popularize this book, which is The Principles of Communism, the predecessor to the Communist Manifesto, and in which very, very lucidly they have laid out what is communism all about. But Frederick Engels, since we are going to, our tribute is to Engels today, Frederick Engels is usually known as the world's first Marxist. I think this is being very, very grossly unfair to him. I mean, Frederick Engels was as much of a co-partner, though Frederick Engels was an extremely modest person. And he, in fact, is on record saying, what Marx accomplished, I quote him, quote, what Marx accomplished, I would not have achieved. Marx stood higher, saw further, and took a broader and a quicker view than all the rest of us. Without him, the theory would be far from what it is today. It therefore rightly bears his name, that is Marxism. Unquote. But this, though he was modest, this will be a grossly unfair assessment to consider Engels to be a junior partner of Marx. They were in fact equal partners, and nobody else recognized this better than Karl Marx himself. Because look at the circumstances in which these two great revolutionaries met. It was in 1844 when Marx was banished from Prussia and his publication was banned. He moves to Paris, starts a new publication. I'm not naming them because it's very difficult to pronounce these names in German, in French, in those languages. So the new publication when it starts, Engels was the youngest contributor and later becomes a co-collaborator of that journal. And one of the earliest articles Engels sends Marx for publication in that journal was on what Engels titled is that a critique of political economy. And he called it the outline critique of political economy. And what was his main point? He demonstrated that all important phenomena in the bourgeois economic system that arise inevitably from private ownership of property. You cannot eliminate poverty without eliminating private property. Marx, when he read this, was greatly fascinated. He records saying that in great elation, he records that here is an independent thinker who has come to this conclusion, the same conclusion that Marx had come to, from a critique of political economy. But Marx had come to the conclusion from the critique of philosophy, Hegelian philosophy. So here you find two thinkers converging on the same idea that without elimination of private property, there cannot be elimination of exploitation. Without elimination of exploitation, there cannot be a society without poverty. And one reaches that conclusion through a critique of political economy. The other reaches that conclusion through a critique of Hegelian philosophy. And this is what brought them together in terms of their thinking. And this is what cemented their understanding. And in this cementing their understanding, for the first time, when they started working together, they together wrote their first collaborative work, which is the Holy Family. And this is where they first elaborate the question of the class, the question of the working people, the working class, the proletariat, and the historical mission of the proletariat as the leader, as the class that will liberate humanity from such exploitation and oppression. So you find this collaborative work developing between two equal partners. So therefore, Engels was thoroughly preoccupied with the same conclusions that he reached, that Marx had reached independently. And then that collaborative activity begins with critique of philosophy and the critique of political economy. And therefore, political economy critique had to be worked out, but the critique of philosophy was to be undertaken first when the idealist foundations had to be overthrown. And this work together, Engels and Marx completed in the German ideology. And it is in German ideology, they work out the fundamental principles of dialectical and historical materialism. That is the world outlook of the working class. So from the philosophical standpoint, the world outlook of the working class is established and enriched further after German ideology. But from the point of view of political economy, there was still a lot more to be done. And that is when Marx comes to a very, very fundamental conclusion from his own critique of philosophy. He comes to the conclusion that he says Hegel, when he talks of his ideal society, Hegel is talking about what he called the civil society. Today, nowadays, civil society is usually used for the NGO movements and people's movements. But civil society is essentially a Hegelian term, which he talked of a society which is an elevated society or a society that is an enlightened society. And that civil society, Hegel's point was that it would be established through the unfolding of the absolute, something that heaven, divine creation. Then Marx comes to the conclusion that this anatomy of this civil society, the anatomy of civil society, has to be sought in political economy. And political economy was a subject matter which Engels was very familiar with. His father had a textile business in Manchester, the capital of the industrial revolution of the world. Engels was sent to work at the father's factory. And there, after seeing the conditions for some years in the emerging industrial capital, in the capital of the industrial revolution, Manchester, Engels writes his first magnum opus, The Condition of the Working Class in England. And it was through this collaboration that finally the critique, the anatomy of the civil society, which is political economy, and that political economy is elaborated by Marx. And it is through this elaboration of this political economy that finally he reaches to his magnum opus, the Das Kapital. But much before that, in 1848, both Engels and Marx collaborate to give all of us the Communist Manifesto, which contained all these principles. All subsequent work was a development of this. But that would be Marx's evolution. In fact, 1843 to 1845, this collaboration between Marx and Engels is a watershed in the development of the Marxist world outlook. It is a watershed in the sense what? It was a transition that both of them undertook from revolutionary democracy to proletarian revolution, from Hegelian influence to historical materialism, from philosophy to political economy. And that is where the collaboration between these two must be firmly understood. But independent of this, Engels had a tremendous contribution in development of the Marxist world outlook. Because when Marx was preoccupied with this study of political economy, of actually dissecting capitalism and its materialist foundations, that is its economic foundations, and gave us all the principles that are there in the Das Kapital, Engels went on to explore the dialectical and historical materialist outlook in all other fields of human activity. And one of the foremost fields in which Engels contributed very significantly was on the relationship between human beings and nature. Now, this is a concept that is where, even today, there's a lot of confusion. When people talk of climate change, they say we must protect nature. We are as much part of nature as anything else on this planet. We are also nature. Nature is also us. That man-nature dialectic, or the human-nature dialectic, is the continuous process of human evolution. And it is not a one-way traffic, that human beings appropriate nature in order to lead a more comfortable life, and also exploit nature to earn profits, which is what is today's climate change problem is all about. That's a different aspect. But it's not a one-way traffic where it's only human beings who appropriate nature for their benefit. But nature also is influenced by human activity. And that is where Engels, in his work, transition from the role of labor in the transition from the ape to the human being. He actually shows the role of labor, how the thumb evolved, how during the process of human evolution, nature also was modified. Nature also develops its own new laws. And what is now happening subsequently, after nearly, we are observing 200th birth anniversary of, completion of 200 years of Engels' birth. Today, what are the latest scientific developments? Every one of them corroborates what Engels worked out in the Dialectics of Nature. And what is the latest one that is coming is rather amazing. And that is what is known as sleep researchers. There's a big deal of scientific inquiry now today happening on why do human beings sleep? Why do anything living sleeps? What causes sleep? What does sleep do to us? And why do we need sleep? And this is throwing up such a wealth of new information of how we evolved and how we live. How nature, for instance, how nature uses sleep in order to rearrange the circuits in your brain, how nature uses sleep in order to give you dreams. And by dreams, what does sleep do to you? We don't realize, we think dreams are all fantasy, but something that is a very traumatic event in our life, let's say in our childhood. Today we have memory of that event, but we don't have the trauma of that event. For some years after that event, that trauma used to continue. But slowly, through the process of your dreams, the trauma element is eliminated. Only memory remains. So the human being is not traumatized all his life. Now, these are new things that are happening, but what did they find about this relationship between human and nature? They found when human beings started living together in the stage of primitive communism, you required somebody or the other to be awake to guard that primitive communal society, that commune. So you had some people to sleep at some times, you had others to sleep at other times, so that at every point of time, there would be somebody awake to guard that commune from any external attack or any attack by the animals. Now, what did this produce? There are two types of human beings today amongst all of us. One section is called the larks, that is, who go to sleep early, who get up early. The other section is called the owls, who go to sleep late and get up late. And they are 40% each. The rest of the 20% are those who sleep at different times. Therefore, in all the 24 hours, there's somebody or the other awake to protect all the rest. Now, this is now embedded in our genetic code. Whether I am a lark or an owl is not decided by my choice, but is decided by my genes. Like your genes decide whether you'll sleep early and get up early, or you'll sleep late and get up late. So it is embedded in the genetic code, means nature has adapted to human activity. This sort of an understanding of Marxism that Engels developed in the field of this human nature dialectics was something that today every single development in science confirms what Engels was talking about, dialectics of nature. What did Engels say? He said there could be, I'm quoting, there could be no question of building the laws of dialectics into nature, but of discovering them in it and evolving them from it. The laws of nature itself is dialectics. That is the unity of the opposites. And today you look at any development, from development in outer space, development in your cosmic world, everything else tells you the same thing, from the Big Bang to the black hole, to the unity of the opposites. If there's matter, there's antimatter. If they collide, there's complete destruction. Now, every single one of the modern day developments actually reconfirm what Engels was talking about in Dialectics of Nature. So what was Engels' contribution? Like this, he moved on to give us the Dialectics of Anthropology. When he wrote on the origins of the family, private property, and the state, the first person on human civilization, he said, with the development of class societies, and the origin of the family as an instrument of property appropriation, that marked the historical defeat of the female sex. He says that is from where this entire question of discrimination of women begins. And what we see today of equality, gender equality, or the entire fight for gender equality, the entire origins and how that has to be fought has been anticipated by him. Or whether it was dialectics and history. Engels' Peasant War in Germany was the first application of dialectical method to the study of history, and which is what produced that work of the peasant war in Germany, and then the dialectics and philosophy. In this work, while Marx was preoccupied with political economy, Engels took on the battle with all the idealist philosophers who were trying to debunk Marxism by advancing grand theories. And one of them was Dühring, a German philosopher. And the classic work of Engels is that Anti-Dühring, where philosophically he demolishes the foundations of idealism and the supremacy of materialism. So you find Engels in every other sphere other than political economy. Ironically, political economy was from where he began. But since Marx was preoccupied with political economy and he continued to assist Marx in his political economy, and all of us know after Capital Volume 2, 3, and the theories of surplus value, all these theories of surplus value later, of course, by others, but Volume 2 and 3, these were all edited and published by Engels after Marx's death. So political economy continues to be his forte, but he would explore the Marxist world outlook in all spheres. Human nature dialectic, dialectics in nature, dialectics and anthropology, dialectics and history, dialectics and philosophy. And it is through this that he enriched and became was the co-collaborator of the Marxist world outlook. So today, when we pay homage to him, we must remember Marx and Engels were not only theorists, were not only those who were sitting only in the libraries working or poring over books and writing their theories. They combined their theory with practical activity. They together formed the first International Working Men's Association in 1964, the first international as it was known later. And then when the time comes, the Working Men's Association, they said this is wrong, men has to be dropped. International working class or the proletariat. So he said when this concept comes in, then Engels was the one, after Marx's death, Engels was the one who says it's no longer the international of the class of the working class, but is the international of the political parties of the working class. And that is why the Communist International, the second international, was the Communist International that was formed, and Engels played a major role. Whether it was on the Paris Commune, whether it was on all the revolutionary activities of their day, why were they proscribed and they were sent out from Prussia? Why were they banned for working in France for after some time? Why did they have to move from place to place and finally settle in England and in London? Was because of their revolutionary activity. And that is the thing. Today, all of us are dedicating ourselves to study Engels, use these 2 months for popularizing the Marxist world outlook and the foundations of this theory, which alone can liberate human beings, we must recollect what Lenin had once said about Marxism, about this Marxist world outlook. What did he say? He was answering a question. He said, why do lakhs of people speaking different languages, living in different cultures, living in different lands, why are they attracted to Marxism? Why do they come to Marxism? And what is the attraction of Marxism has for them? People who have not met each other ever in their life or probably will never meet. But on the commonality is with this philosophy, this ideology. Why? Lenin answers this and he says, this is the only philosophy or the world outlook that combines two principles. One of being supremely scientific and the other of being revolutionary and emancipatory. He says these two aspects are combined not because the founders of this doctrine in their own life combined both these aspects, but these are combined intrinsically and inseparably. And it is this combination of being supremely scientific and revolutionary that creates Marxism as a creative science, a science which is not static, a theory that is not static. Because if it's supremely scientific, what is the principles of being supremely scientific? As developments happen, the analysis of those developments also has to keep pace. And that is why Lenin says, Marxism means the concrete analysis of concrete conditions. As conditions change, if your analysis doesn't change, then you are not a Marxist. And that is something we'll have to imbibe into ourselves. That is why today, in these times of Corona, in these times of the pandemic, in these times when we are battling, the fundamental truth is there before all of us. The coronavirus, COVID pandemic, may not distinguish between me and you or between any human being. But capitalism does, in the sense that it gives the capacity to resist to some, and to the majority of people, the weakness being unable to resist it because of the exploitation. The strength of humanity to face such pandemics, such infections, that strength ultimately lies in our power of resistance internally, and that can come only when exploitation ends. And that is why you see today how the socialist countries, or the 25 biggest economies in the world, the only country that has overcome or controlled or contained the pandemic and registering a positive growth in its GDP is China, socialist China. Vietnam has got the most minimum amount of COVID deaths. Cuba is sending medical teams and medicines to more than 50 countries in the world to combat the pandemic. And look at our great Trump's USA, our Prime Minister Modi's greatest friend. And as he moves into his own election, he is compounding the pandemic in the United States and leading to more this infection spreading and the COVID deaths, like in India. The sort of things that the BJP in government is doing, demolishing our constitutional order, demolishing all the foundational pillars of our constitution, mounting a very big attack on the democratic rights and civil liberties of the people, and sharpening communal polarization while selling our country to private profits of both foreign and domestic capital. That is why what he calls a self-reliant India, Modi's slogan, as though it's a new slogan, it's part of our national movements in the days of Darabai Nauroji. So anyway, but if he says he's self-reliant India, what he's actually doing in practice is a self-subservient India. Now, by doing all these things, instead of single-mindedly focusing and containing the pandemic and providing relief to the people, these sort of activities are making people more vulnerable to this pandemic. So we have our battles at home. But one thing we'll have to remember when we are releasing this publication, and your target of Bharati Pustakalaya is to reach, I think, 1 lakh people in these 2 months who will purchase this publication and be enlightened as a consequence of it. We must finally remember what Lenin said about Engels. He said, and I'll conclude with this quote of mine, of Lenin's. I said, quote, he said, Engels taught the working class to know itself and to be conscious of itself. And he substituted, that is Engels, substituted science for dreams. So science is not elimination of dreams, but dreams are not the basis for our work, but science is. And the scientific content of what Engels provided to the Marxist outlook is phenomenal. Therefore, paying homage to Engels means enriching ourselves, doubling our resolve, and enriching ourselves in order to combat the challenges before us today and to achieve our objective of emancipation. I'm sure your efforts in Tamil Nadu will produce these results. And thank you all for giving me this opportunity. Thank you once again, Bharati Pustakalaya, for this thing. And with your permission, Gunashekaran, as the president, I'll take leave of you. Thank you. Thank you very much.